Let's begin with a word of prayer together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, be acceptable and pleasing to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I recently came across a book. A friend of mine passed this book on to me. It says, "Come Again to the Circle." And the subtitle of it is, "Four Leaders Imagine the Church Beyond COVID." Recent published book. And even before I could get to the table of contents, I was hooked on the book by a quote on a page by itself before I ever got to the table of contents by Reverend Sharon Dykes, who is a dean of students at a Mennonite university. And the quote is this: "The church is an invitation to come back again to the circle, to bring all of yourself, to see and listen to one another and the meaning we share, to discover who we are in that circle, and then to come again and again, each time with more to offer and each time learning more." Kind of got me excited about that's what I want church to be like. When I arrive, whether it's a study or a worship service or a justice outing, I want this to be an invitation to a circle that gets ever wider and wider. We started out with that hymn today, "Draw the Circle Wide." This idea of circle is a powerful thing. But this circle, if it just stays the same size, doesn't do a whole lot for God's being, God's creative resources that were intended for all of humanity and all of creation to celebrate this gift that we see glimpses of here and there. It begins with an invitation, and invitations are kind of interesting things. When I first moved to San Angelo, Texas in 1980, showed up to my first class, and I didn't know a soul. We had just moved there a few weeks before school started. Didn't have a chance even to meet the neighbors in our neighborhood before starting school. And I remember at recess, the game at recess was soccer. Man, I played soccer. I was all excited about playing soccer at recess. And recess was kind of more open. There wasn't much control to the recess. They kind of had teachers observing what was going on, but kids just played games, the games they wanted to play, and soccer was the game they chose. In order for the teams to be divided up, it ended up being the two most popular kids in the class, ended up being kind of the team captains, and they began choosing their teams from the cluster of us that wanted to play soccer. As you might imagine, I was the last person selected. I was the new kid, didn't know anything about me, didn't know if I played soccer or not. It was a hard thing to be selected last when you're in a place that's new. I mean, if you're in a place that's new, you want to be affirmed and someone know your name, whatever it might be. And we got playing the game at recess, and they noticed that I was actually pretty good. I actually scored 2 goals in that opening time in that first recess. So day 2 comes, and the 2 team captains are the same. I found out they were the same team captains every day. And they started selecting players. And my name wasn't last anymore. They knew something about me, and so I was invited into that team in a different way. Sometimes invitation can have a hard edge to it. Who we invite, who we don't invite, there's that dynamic. And then there's the positive side of invitation of being included and welcomed and feeling as though you belong to something, even when you're new or when you've been dismissed in the past. Who would, at least in today's circle, you go to your mailbox, you go to the little silver box like we have down the street to get your mail, and most of the mail is junk. It's not stuff you want to deal with very much. But every once in a while, you get an invitation to something. there's something powerful about getting an invitation to something, whether it's a party, a reception, a shower, a wedding, a special event, a gathering of friends, and that someone took the time to write out an invitation and include you in that invitation. There's a sense of warmth of someone knows me by name, and someone values my company, and someone values my participation in something. And there's something meaningful about the receiving of an invitation and what that might mean. Now, in church circles, invitation has kind of a word that most people kind of cringe at a lot. It's the E word. It's hard to say the E word out loud in a place like this, evangelism. It's kind of a scary word. Think of evangelism. We have all kinds of mental images when we think of the word evangelism. We think of knocking on doors and saying hello, and there's all those kind of negative images that come around evangelism or invitation to something. In our story today is Acts chapter 10, and Brandy captured the end part of that story in chapter 10. And the story begins with Peter receiving a vision that he's supposed to travel somewhere to the house of Cornelius and to share a message with Cornelius and those that are in his household, whoever is there, the message of Jesus. Now, Peter's like going, why do you want to send me there? These are Gentile people. They don't know anything about what we're doing. Why would I go share this message with them? But the Spirit nudges Peter simply to go and to step outside of his own comfort zones, to go to a place and to a people he did not know, and to share the message that he loves so much in his heart. And when Peter got there, he thought to himself, I'm going to preach this message, I'm going to share this message, but they're not going to respond to this. They don't know the context of Jesus' story. They don't know anything about what I've experienced as a disciple, and he's not been a part of the experience of knowing Jesus or maybe even hearing of Jesus. But he shows up, he shares the message, and probably reluctantly, but does it, and he's surprised. As Brandy alluded to in the sharing, not only did Cornelius, but everyone in the household was captured by the message that Peter had to offer that day. So much so that Peter had to himself, I can't deny the opportunity for people to have their lives transformed. I can't say, well, you can't because of this or this or this. I've shared this message openly, and these people respond openly, and Peter was overwhelmed with surprise by how the Spirit moved among those that were listeners that day, and what a change it made in their life, and what a change it would make to the church. Did Peter want to go make the invitation? Probably not. But Peter saw the value of the invitation to let someone else hear what it is we experience in our life. One of the biggest challenges when we think about inviting someone to something, and especially comes to our faith, and even that a progressive faith, the last thing we want to do is force our faith on somebody else. Well, they may not want what I experience. I don't want to feel like I'm being pushy or kind of pushing my faith on someone else. I want to be mindful of their own experience, their own faith tradition, their own belief systems. The last thing they want is someone else saying, you need to try this out. We don't necessarily want someone to feel a negative energy by our invitation. But at the same time, there is power in the story that we experience at St. Andrew every week. The story of this church is actually pretty significant and powerful. I got an invitation in the fall of 2019 if my name would be considered for this position at St. Andrew. And I actually got a little excited about that invitation. And so I said, sure, I'll submit my paperwork in, and we'll see where that goes. And the cool thing about that invitation was it took a few months to get all the stars to align to have the conversations, but once the conversations started, and we got to know one another just a little bit between the search committee and myself, the more excited I got. Now, most people know I'm kind of an excited, high-energy person anyways, but it's kind of interesting when you kind of get excited about something, and then you get exposed to a little bit more, and you get even more excited about it. It's kind of hard to kind of let it go at that point. And what I was witnessing was not only the experience of the conversations, but I was seeing the passion and the energy and the enthusiasm of the team that this church had tasked to look for a senior pastor. And I actually say I was almost more contagious to the church by the contagiousness of the people on the team than anything else. To hear the energy and excitement of those sharing the story of what this church was all about, its ministry, its witness, its justice, its work, its inclusion and welcome and affirmation of all people. And I've been a part of many churches in my life, but I had not been a part of a church community as progressive as this one, as open and as welcome as this one. And one of the things that was interesting in that invitation, as excited as I was a little bit nervous about that whole piece and how that would work. I remember 2 weeks in, and I was preaching to a camera. And I remember an outside venue somewhere, we had the CSA food collection, and I think there's somewhere, I think it was Avis, pretty sure. Avis came up to me and says, "Now, Chris, you have permission to make us really mad with your messages. It's okay to make us mad. You're here to challenge us and push us." And I think I need to kind of challenge myself and push me. I've not shared messages this openly before. And I told the search committee I had kind of been in a place where you had way to the left and way to the right and trying to find a message that found its way through the middle that all people could find welcome and space. And I had not been in a place more leaning to one direction or not theologically in the work and the community. And the invitation to me to be a part of this church was also an invitation for me to you of this is a growing piece that we kind of learn this invitational spirit progressively with one another, week by week with one another. It's one of the things I loved about this quote that was shared here. We see and listen to one another and the meaning we share. We discover who we are in that circle and then come again and again, each time with more to offer, each time learning more. Is that we are progressive beings. We haven't got it figured out yet. And my guess is we won't get it all figured out by the time we take our last breath on this earth. But we're inviting people into a space to learn, and to grow, and to doubt, and to question, and to push, and be challenged. At the same time, to be loved, and celebrated, and embraced. Sometimes being a part of the invitation to a church is stepping outside the walls of the church and standing up at a Black Lives Matter event. Or being at a booth at a Pride event in KC or in Gardner. Or sometimes it's down in Friends Hall on one of our IHN host weeks and just listening to one of our guests share their story of how they came to a place of being unhoused and their dreams of being in a place again and what that would be like. Or maybe it's down at Center of Grace and the group that makes the meal and serves the meal, and to hear stories and to encounter people that are out on the edge in terms of where does my next meal come from? Or maybe it's out in the community helping build a Habitat house. And maybe more being at one of the house blessings, knowing that you helped hammer some of the wood and you helped paint some of the walls, and the key is handed to the new homeowner and they break down in tears because they never thought they'd have a house. And we are present in those places in terms of justice, and it makes a difference. And at the same time, we're out and about doing all those things in the community, we find value in terms of how we care for one another. I think of our recent passings of Ruth and Gloria. Jim has said more than once how he has valued this community, but even valued it more in the last month. Not that he didn't value it less, but now it's exponentially more meaningful to him. He can count the cards, the stack of cards at his house of notes that people have sent, hugs and embraces that he's received. When we share our lives with one another in an open, intimate, vulnerable way, our lives are gradually changed and morphed and transformed into something significant and powerful. We come in worship services and we hear a song sung, a hymn that we sing together, and something, maybe it's just a phrase in the song, or maybe an instrument, the way it's played, allows our mind to travel and sense the presence of God we had not sensed in a while. Maybe it's a prayer that Chuck or Gary or Denise pray at the table when we do the prayers of the people. There's a phrase that talks about our urging to go out into the world, or our urging to be introspective about our life and faith, and knowing that we're not doing that alone. Or we walk up and down the halls in between classes and worship, and we hear this kind of brush up against the side of our leg. Oh, it's one of those other little kids running around. And we're reminded of the gift of the generations that are in this place and how we learn from one another. Each one of us has something to teach the other. You know, one of the great things about an invitation is when you invite someone to something, is that sometimes we're trying to figure out, what do I tell another person when it comes to church? What do I invite them to? Invite them to the passion that you see and experience in this place. The story tells itself. I serve on a board that many of you know I serve on called Bethany Fellows. It's a board that helps encourage young clergy right out of seminary in their first call of ministry. And years ago, when the Lilly Foundation did research on young clergy, determined that 40% of young clergy coming out of seminary would leave the ministry in 5 years. Almost half of young clergy were gone in 5 years. Bethany Fellows came along and decided to cultivate practices and a support mechanism for those clergy not to feel so isolated and alone in their work. And Bethany Fellows has been at work almost 25 years. And you look at all those that have gone through the program and those currently in the program, of those participants in that program, 90+% are still in ministry versus the 60% that were in there before. I mean, a 30% difference because of relationship building. And one of the things on Bethany Fellows that I'm tasked to do is be a money raiser for Bethany Fellows. I'm kind of one of the development people for Bethany Fellows. And I'm thinking, gosh, it's hard to ask money for $50,000, $100,000, $1,000, whatever the amount is. It seems like I'm not sure I can ask those big amounts of people. And I start worrying not about the amount, and I pay more attention to the story. And I let the story tell itself. St. Andrew has this story that's a remarkable story. 32 years this church has been in existence, changing lives, transforming lives, welcoming people that maybe had not been welcomed before. When we think about what church is and what church can be, the title of the book is Come Again to the Circle. A lot of people have just left church altogether. And when COVID happened, it just magnified all kinds of dynamics for the church in terms of when to come back, and if I come back, and should I come back. The invitation is always there, and there is cards scattered throughout the sanctuary today that are invitation cards. And we'd like to, as a church and church growth, invite you to invite someone else to church next week. And that invitation could be to someone that's not connected to this church at all. Or it could be someone that you've not seen that's a part of this church you'd like to see again in this space. And some people, because of health concerns or others, have been able to connect with us online and stay with us online, which has been really powerful and good. And yet we miss seeing the faces of people. And so sometimes it's an invitation to someone we already know that we miss in this place. And sometimes it's an invitation to a neighbor or to a friend or a family member that could use a message of unconditional love, of reaching out a concern for other people, of knowing that when we risk a certain degree of vulnerability and openness, that we show integrity and authenticity for who we are as a community. I think that's what people are looking for, integrity and authenticity of what it means to be a people of faith. That we're not governed by fear and control, that we share our lives in love and openness and welcome. It makes a huge difference when a community governs itself by fear and guilt versus a community that governs itself by love and compassion. It makes all the difference. All you have to say is, we've got a special Sunday coming up. And our community is all about love and welcome and embrace. And this is how it's changed my life. Won't you join me on Sunday? Won't you join me at a conversation of a study group? Won't you join me as we go out and try to make a difference in the world? Because when we come together, we may have arrived here as individuals, but we leave here as one large community. And I am better because of you, and you are better because of me, and we are better because of all of us in this space. St. Andrew's story is a significant, powerful, welcoming, embracing, transforming story. It's one worth telling. It's one worth sharing. It's one worth inviting.